Here's Mexico. I'm going to include the imports from Mexico, and I'm going to zoom it in a little bit so you can see. That's the U.S. I'll go back to Mexico. Sylvia, Mexico has experienced, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but between 50 and 65,000 violent deaths. I keep hearing different numbers. Perhaps you can correct us. In the past 6 years, and an extraordinary number in a country that actually experienced traditionally a decline nationally in homicide rates until around 2005, 2006. Most of these deaths are gun-related. I mean, many. Although we hear of the gruesome stories and they're often reported, I'd say the vast majority are gun-related. How are these guns and ammunition getting into Mexico?
And that's the $64,000 question and what everybody wants to know on both sides of the border. We know that there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of different types of firearms. Assault weapons, rifles, pistols, revolvers. Then you have military-grade weapons, Barrett 50 caliber rifles, hand grenades that are floating all over Mexico that are being used by the drug cartels to kill each other, to kill Mexican army soldiers, to kill police. The problem is that only a small fraction of the guns that are out there on the street are seized annually by Mexican authorities. Out of that small fraction, only a small fraction of those are ever actually submitted to the American Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives for tracing. So of those that are, just to kind of give you a numbers perspective, from roughly 2009 to 2011, only 30,000 guns were submitted to the ATF for tracing out of an unknown number of guns that were actually seized by the Mexican authorities. Out of those 30,000 guns, roughly 70% of them were traced back to U.S. points of sale. Now, out of all the other guns that were not traced, that were untraceable because the serial numbers were filed off, because they were military grade and you can't buy them at a gun store here in the United States, or they were put back into cartel hands, or there was something shady going on. We don't know where all those guns come from. That's the only estimate. That is the only resource for statistics that the U.S. government has to go on. Then on the other side, you have those military-grade weapons that are showing up. You have 20 and 30-year-old rifles, rocket-propelled grenades, rocket launchers, hand grenades that come from South Korea, firearms coming from Civil War remnants in El Salvador and in Honduras. It's really a mishmash. So you have, and then you have military-grade weapons that are coming from Mexican stocks. Heckler and Koch, H&K is one of the bigger suppliers of firearms to the Mexican military. So some of those guns get diverted into the hands of the cartels. Some of the guns that are supplied to Mexican police end up in the hands of the cartels. So they're really coming from several different directions. The problem is, and there is no other country in the entire world where gun ownership is more politicized than it is in the United States. So answering that question of where do the guns in Mexico come from has a completely different context in this perspective of the drug war than any other conflict in the world, because you have a very strong pro-gun lobby that controls Congress like no other lobby group in the entire United States, saying that this is just a ploy by the U.S. government to take away all our guns and enact gun control legislation. And then on the other hand, you have the federal government saying, ATF trace statistics tell us that the vast majority of guns in Mexico are coming from the United States, so we have to figure out how to stop the southbound flow of weapons. So, not being Mexican and not living in Mexico, I can only speculate as to the importance that the Mexican people put on exactly where the guns come from. I just know that they want them off the street and they want them to stop killing people. But that is it's a very complex question. We know they come from a lot of different places, but we will never know with any certainty exactly what proportion of firearms and explosives and military-grade weapons come from what parts of the world.
Thanks, Sylvia. I want to now turn to Uganda, which is in what we might describe as a bad neighborhood, circled by DRC to the west, Sudan to the north. You've got Ethiopia to the northeast. You've got Kenya. You've got Burundi, Rwanda. All countries, barring some that have had sort of extraordinary conflict.